Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On the show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, and more, including smaller deals that you can do without significant capital. My name is Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the DealQuest Podcast. Let's get started. Hey, DealQuest community, this is a solocast, and this is going to be a fun one. This is based upon a talk that I gave in Singapore. Actually, I did the same workshop 3 times in Singapore at the EO Entrepreneurs Organization Global Leadership Conference. And it's something that now some other people want me to come and do at their various chapters. And it's an approach that I think is an interesting take on deal making. So I wanted to bring it to you guys, my podcast audience, who don't get to attend the, if you're not an Entrepreneurs Organization member, you're not in leadership, and you don't get to go to Singapore. So far, you haven't been able to hear this. So I wanted to bring it here on this solocast. So here's the concept. There are really 2 big things that I did. And when I do this live, I do a lot of hot seats. So you won't get the benefit of that on the solocast. But if you do have an opportunity to come, whether it's at an EO event and listen, I don't do a lot of promoting on this podcast, but, this is something that I do for various organizations. I do it, speaking in workshops and things like that. So if it appeals to you and there's an organization you think would be useful for, you can definitely let me know. But you are going to get the concept and the value here, except not the interaction in the hot seats, and see how it plays out in real life, which is really helpful. So the concepts really come down to 2 things. The first thing is this, and you've heard me, if you listen to this podcast, you heard me talk about mindset all the time. But one of the things when I'm in a room of entrepreneurs, like at the Global Leadership Conference in Singapore, or, really, frankly, with, most of my clients who are entrepreneurs and business executives looking to grow companies, and you talk about the difference in the mindset between an employee and an entrepreneur, they get it, right? They've either been employees previously and became entrepreneurs. That's true for most of us, although there are a few people I know who never worked for somebody in their entire life. Most people did. Or certainly, either way, if you are an entrepreneur and you have employees, which is what a true entrepreneur has, as opposed to somebody being self-employed, then you also understand this difference in mentality, right? And you can spend, if you speak to anybody who's an entrepreneur and you ask them about this, we could probably have a conversation for hours. And there's also countless, hundreds, thousands of pages online, articles, blogs, posts, distinctions about this conversation of the mindset of an entrepreneur versus the mindset of an employee, and differences in terms of risk-taking and willingness to put themselves on the line and, desires to sort of create a vision and own something and build something and on and on and on and on, right? And so that's sort of pretty accepted wisdom. And if you research it, and in fact, this talk that I give, I do a slide that shows the research when I put in employee versus entrepreneur mindset and how much comes up and how significant that is. However, as you've heard on the podcast, there's another distinction in mindset, and that's the difference between an entrepreneur and a deal maker. And there is a big difference between that, right? And one of the things I talk about in this workshop, and folks, this part of it may be more familiar to my listeners than the second piece that I'm really going to talk about, the angle on that. But for many in the room, many entrepreneurs, they haven't really thought about this. And what was interesting is in all 3 of the workshops I did in Singapore, it really resonated with people. It was a revelation for some, made others think. Maybe they had a little bit of a feeling of this, but it really crystallized it, for those who it wasn't a total revelation for. But it was really useful. And that is this concept of that there is this different mindset of a deal maker. And that while you can grow a business organically and you can do that very successfully, and some people really do, and you don't have to ever do a deal, there is this opportunity for deal-driven growth. There is this opportunity to solve problems and to take advantage of opportunities with this additional set of tools, right? And, we've talked repeatedly that it's not just capital raising and M&A, although those are 2 big ones, but joint ventures, strategic alliances, licensing, all that kind of stuff. Okay. Now, the interesting part that I discovered in putting together my presentation for the Singapore workshop is that I did research. So I said I did a search of entrepreneur versus employee mindset. Well, I did a search of entrepreneur versus dealmaker mindset. And this is the interesting part. Whereas there's countless posts, articles, results that come up from searching employee versus entrepreneur mindset, there's very little that comes up on dealmaker versus entrepreneur mindset. In fact, a chunk of the stuff that comes up is actually the employee versus entrepreneur mindset. Same things that come up for that search come up in the entrepreneurial dealmaker mindset search, which is not, so those aren't really aren't relevant to the entrepreneur versus dealmaker mindset conversation. And then out of something like 7 hits in the initial search that showed up on the first page, that were dealmaker versus entrepreneur mindset, 6 of them were mine. So there's only one piece of content that was not mine. And when I presented this at the workshops, I said that I'm not saying this to say that, oh, look at me. My joke actually was that, so either you are listening to somebody who's raving alone from the top of a mountain like a crazy person on something nobody else cares about, or maybe by the end of the workshop, you'll realize that this is an important and maybe underutilized, underthought about distinction that could really make a difference for you. And my experience, fortunately, was, and people's feedback was, that it really did. So it's interesting that this conversation is not out there in anywhere close to, not even in the same universe. It's barely out there compared to all these materials on entrepreneur versus employee mindset. So that was the first piece, setting up that mindset. The second piece, which is that first piece, if you're listening to the podcast, you've heard in various ways, on when I asked guests about the dealmaker mindset and what they think about that difference in some of pieces of my past solocasts. Where I took that, though, in the workshop, I think is very, very useful. And again, it resonated really, really well. And that is, I had people in the workshop start out by thinking about it and then sharing with a partner their biggest challenge, frustration, issue, or opportunity not fully taken advantage of in their business currently, right? The biggest one or two. And, a lot of the things that came out of it were things that you would probably predict, right? And might be experiencing yourself, whether it's difficulty finding talent, right? Hiring, whether it's wanting to get into a new market and having challenges there, whether it's geographic or getting into a new industry or expanding a product line, or any of those kinds of things, right? Or, expanding sales, growing generally, all of that, right? And what I did was in the workshop is so the sort of like fun, semi-tongue-in-cheek, but really true saying I had in the workshop was I said, listen, everybody's familiar with the phrase, there's an app for that, right? Somebody needs some functionality, something to be done. Well, there's an app for that. There's got to be an app for that. And that's become sort of this go-to phrase. Well, similarly, there's a deal for that, right? In the business context of dealing with a business frustration issue in your business, there's always a deal for that. Does that mean that you should always do a deal for that? No. But it does mean that is a possible, a whole bag of additional solution tools to any given business problem there might be a deal for that. And in keeping with the mind shift from being an entrepreneur, just an entrepreneur, to also being a deal maker, if you come from the place of there must be a deal for that, like there must be an app for that, then it opens up your mind to say, okay, well, what type of deal might be there be for that? And this is what we dealt with in the, in the hot seats, right? So let me give you some examples. Easiest one, right? And one that a lot of people are dealing with now is, I'm having trouble finding talent. I'm having trouble hiring people. Well, let's think about that. Sure. Should you and can you and should you continue to take organic approaches to trying to hire the best talent, whether that's through recruiting, paying recruiters, online post searches, search boards, referral programs, maybe to pay, your existing employees to refer people, whatever you do to try to find talent organically, should you continue to do that? Sure. However, there might be a deal for that. In fact, there is a deal for that, right? There might be a deal for you for that. Well, and I've mentioned this in the past, many, many of the acquisitions that we are doing now, and a higher percentage in recently, and this goes cyclically, right? But because labor's tight, because especially qualified, talented people in various industries are tight, and also because your best talent is actually often not looking for a job, right? And I'm not saying that there aren't people out there who are high quality, who are actually looking for a job, who have decided to leave because they were unhappy or lost their job because of downsizing or whatever. Just because they're on the market doesn't mean they're not of high quality, that's for sure. But as a ratio, as a percentage, the truth is a lot of the best performers are folks that are doing well, and are happy at their existing place. And you're not going to find them necessarily. I mean, some of the aggressive recruiters will reach out to folks who aren't actually looking for a job, but they're not necessarily posting on job boards or going to job fairs or things like that, right? Well, and they might not be so interested in making a change individually. But if you acquire their company, now there's a lot you have to do when you do that to make sure people are happy staying, not worried about their jobs, and integrated into new culture. But if they could stay with their team, right, who they may love working with, and you can acquire not people individually, but sort of en masse, whether that's a few people or whether that's a big department, then that is a way to jump forward in a talent search to be able to do that through an acquisition. Now, it doesn't have to even be a full acquisition. It could be what we call an acqui-hire. We've talked about that on the podcast from time to time, which is a deal into which you are bringing in talent, positioning out to the marketplace like it was an acquisition, but behind the scenes, it really may not have been. And that's most often a good for people who maybe are a few years into their entrepreneurship or self-employment journey and figure out that although they love what they do, everything else around running the business, making payroll, dealing with vendors, you name it, right, is something that's a distraction from their passion, and maybe they want to go back to it, but it's tough for somebody to say, they probably made a big deal about them opening their own company, becoming an entrepreneur, and then just go back and say that they're going to take a job is, often difficult from an ego point of view, from a psychological point of view, from a presentation out to the marketplace and or a family point of view. So for them to say that their company was acquired or merged into your company, and behind the scenes you're doing a deal with their employee, and maybe they're getting a percentage of revenue or some other upside that ties them into the performance of their existing business or the growth thereof, then it can really make sense. Often the people it makes sense for also is on the other end of the spectrum. Somebody's got that 15, 20, 30, 25, 30 years in, and they're tired, right? And maybe, they've gone through the up and down cycles. Maybe the business is a little flat. Maybe it's not because of economy, but because they've lost some energy or whatever. And they also just want to be freed up from everything else they've got to do other than what they really love and at that stage of their life. So that's a deal that kind of deal, that acqui-hire kind of deal is a great way to get talent and pretty common. The other thing is you can get access to talent without acquiring it or acqui-hiring it through some sort of joint venture or strategic alliance, right? Or employee leasing deal, right? Sharing of employees. I mean, we didn't really do an employee leasing deal, but recently for my firm, we had one of our main associates who took a step back for family reasons, and we were growing and we needed to hire, and we're working on hiring another associate. And we reached out to our connections in our legal circles, and one of the other entrepreneurs organization law firms in the country had a couple of attorneys that had some excess capacity, and we did a deal to pay them a certain amount and get access to these talented attorneys, right? So we did sort of it's not technically an employee leasing arrangement, but a shared employment relationship or subcontract relationship, as they would call it in some other places, or a shared talent to serve our clients with qualified people who were vetted and we knew the other firm owners, and it made sense for them because it filled some excess capacity that they had. So they pulled in some money, even if it wasn't at their full rates, and we were able to make a profit margin on it, right? Now that was a temporary arrangement because we've since hired and had people come back. But, that is a deal that we didn't have to go out and find our own talent. We said, who has that talent that we can access it? So that's an example, right? If your problem is that you've been trying to get into a new industry, right? You have a product that you think would be great in a particular industry. I often say on this podcast, I ask who has access to that industry in your, who you want to access, right? Because even if they don't sell it, they sell a totally different product. Well, if they're salespeople, if they're business development people, if they're relationship people, if even at maybe higher levels, right, their executive level, they have connections there, that's a way through a strategic alliance or joint venture you can get access to it. So the problem there is, hey, we've been trying to get into a new industry, and you could try to sell into that industry organically, but maybe there's a deal for that, right? The deal for that could be a strategic alliance, joint venture, joint marketing arrangement, or some sort of contract for them, to referral. And for example, the investment advisor space is what's traditionally called referral solicitor relationships. They're now called, the SEC is now, they're now called promoter relationships, but whatever you call them in your industry, It's a way you can properly pay people to send you business, right? For some industries, they call it channel partner arrangements, right? And I've talked about those before. So geography, that's another one, right? And I've talked about this. But again, if let's say you tried to open an office in a new city because maybe you had one client there and you said, oh, maybe we can expand there. But for some reason, the sales efforts and the expansion efforts are not going well there. Well, maybe there's somebody local, right, who has great knowledge who you can joint venture with or strategic alliance with or acquire. So the whole point is, and again, in these workshops, we do it real time. I mean, I don't pre-prepare for it, whatever. We run a mic. We have people say, this is what I have going on in my business. And I coach them one-on-one in front of an audience. And the great thing is that even though that discussion is one-on-one, fixing or helping or giving ideas to that particular entrepreneur on how there might be a deal for that, on how there may be something else in this big toolbox that I'm very familiar with that may help them get through their frustration issue or problem in their business. Other people who are listening really get to say, hey, how does that apply to me? And they get value as well. So for the purpose of this solocast, I won't continue down and give 1,000 other examples. And there is something powerful about seeing it in real time. But I want to leave you with really, two things when you're thinking about it for your own business, or if you're speaking to you're another kind of advisor, whether you're an accountant or a banker or insurance person or other attorneys out there. I know I have some of my fellow attorneys listen to this podcast, whoever it is. 2 shifts. 1, think about what it means to be a deal maker, not just an entrepreneur. And number 2, right, just keep that little phrase, there's a deal for that. And say, or is there a deal for that? I think the answer is always yes. It doesn't mean that it's right for you, but so maybe the better question is what deal is there for that? But the point is, if you keep that mindset of that, there's a deal for that. And even if you can't think of what that deal might be, come and talk to somebody who is a deal person. And trust me, I mean, there wasn't a single person in any of these 3 workshops I did, right? In all the hot seats I did, who raised an issue. And some of them were very interesting and not typical, where I could not think of a potential deal for them to do to help solve that problem, move that forward, accelerate their growth, deal with that frustration or issue. And that they did not say either they're going to go do that, or at least they're going to consider that as a possibility, as one of the things that they can do to resolve that issue. So folks, I'm going to leave you with that this week, right? Have a deal maker's mindset, ask or say there must be a deal for that, and then help figure out which one that is to deal with whatever business frustration issue, et cetera, you're having. Identify those issues, and let's figure out what deals there are that can help you solve them. All right, folks, have a great week. Take care. Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. I want to invite you to a unique way to tap into the wisdom and experience of the DealQuest community. The Deal Den is a place where entrepreneurs, high-level executives, and business leaders come together, support each other's growth and success, and share what's working best, as well as what challenges we are facing right now. You will get input not only from me, but from all of our members. We collaborate and serve each other. To join us, go to corykupfer.com/dealden. I'll see you there. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.